All right, so first things first, let's crack open Android Studio and start a new Flutter project. We're going to be building this one completely from scratch. Now, once you've chosen Flutter application, click Next, and we're going to name our project TODOE Flutter. And once we're done here, then let's just click Next and Finish. All right, so here's our brand new application with the usual bells and whistles. So we've got our main.dart, which contains the sample counter app, which I'm going to basically delete pretty much most of it. So I'm going to get rid of my home page. I'm also going to get rid of my app, and instead I'm going to create it pretty much from scratch. So I'm going to use the shortcut stls to create a new stateless widget, and I'm going to call it my app so that this matches with the app that I'm going to run. Now, whenever you see a red box around here, this is created by Android Studio to make it easy for you to tab around and to change certain things. But if you want it to disappear, just hit tab and it will go away. Now, inside my app, instead of building a container, I actually want a material app. So I'm going to add a material app, which is going to have a home route. So the first screen that we're going to see, and I'm going to call this a task screen. And I'm going to create it right here. Now, this has got a red squiggly line because obviously we don't have a task screen yet. So let's go ahead and create it. So inside our lib folder, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it screens. So this is where we're going to be organizing our screen files. And then we're going to create a new Dart file, which I'm going to call task. And what I want to show up in the first screen of our app is going to be something called tasks screen. And I'm going to create it with my round brackets. Now I've got my red squiggly lines because task screen doesn't yet exist. So let's go ahead and create it by creating a new folder where I'm going to create all my screen files. That's where I'm going to organize all my screen files. And I'm going to create the first one, which is a Dart file that's going to be called tasks_screen. And I'm going to hit enter, and now we have our task screen.dart. So here I'm going to import material, which I pretty much will always need when I'm creating UI. And then I'm going to create a new stateless widget, which is going to be called tasks screen. Now notice that in this case, I've got an S here so that we've got a plural, so a large number of tasks, which is going to show up on screen, but just check to make sure that they match exactly. And if you want, it's always easy to just copy and paste as well. So we've still got our red squiggly line because we just need to import our screens/tasks screen. And now all the errors are gone and we are no longer in trouble with Android Studio. So finally, let's go back to our task screen and let's start building out this screen. We don't want to create just a container. So I'm going to run my app as it is so that we can build while we see what we're building, so that we can paint our pixels onto the screen, if you will. So now that our build is done, we've got this black screen, which is not very exciting, but we're going to jazz it up very shortly. So what is our app going to look like? Well, in the download section or the resources for this lesson, you'll find a download to the TODOE mockups. So I created these in Sketch, which unfortunately is an application that's only available on Mac. So I've actually exported my mockup to a PDF so that you can download it and be able to zoom in and look around and pick out the colors and look at what you need to design while you're doing it in Android Studio. But I'm also going to be doing it step by step with you. So let's take this design and let's transfer it into widgets. So firstly, we need to have a background color, which is just a light blue accent color. We don't want to have a container on screen, but instead, notice that we have our material app as the topmost widget. Then very shortly, it's followed by a task screen, which takes us over here. And we're going to build a scaffold as usual. So our scaffold is going to have a background color of light blue accent. And as soon as I hit save, we see our color rendered on our simulator. Now, in this case, our scaffold is not going to have an app bar, but it is, of course, going to have a body. So the body of our scaffold is going to be a column widget, because notice how in our mockup we've got an icon, we've got some text, some more text, and then we've got this other component down here. So everything's kind of more or less stacked vertically. So I think a column will work quite nicely for this scenario. And inside our column, we're going to have a bunch of children. And the first child we have is this icon here. Now, in order to grab the icon, we're going to tap into the icon widget, and the icon data is going to be icons.list, which is this one here. Just looks kind of like a to-do list. So now that I've added my icon, you can sort of see it just right up here in the top left corner. And to make it a little bit easier, let's add our text here as well, why don't we? The to-do-y title. So let's add a text widget, and the string that's going to be inside the text widget is, of course, to-do-y. And once I hit save, then you'll see it's sort of all mangled up here in the top left corner. Now, one option is we could wrap our column inside, of course, our safe area widget, which we normally use to stay safe from the parts of our phone where the user can't really interact with. So on the iPhone, it's around the notch. On the Android phone, it's going to be around the status bar, so where it says the battery and the time, etc. And also this part on the iPhone is kind of the new home button, so that's also going to be outside of the safe area. But for me, this kind of margin is not really enough. I kind of want to push it down a little bit further because all our content is quite heavily padded away from all the edges. So instead of using a safe area, instead I'm actually just going to use a container, because in our containers, remember, there's always the padding property. So let's pad our column and give it some edge insets. Now, instead of using the one that I normally use, which is all, by giving it the same amount of padding around all four sides, instead I'm going to choose only in this case. And this is because I want to have different amounts of padding for the top and the rest of the three sides. So first I'm going to start off with my top value, which is actually going to be a whopping 60 because I want to push it down a lot. And then I've got my left, which is going to be 30, my right, which is going to be 30, and the bottom, which is going to be 30 as well. So now let's hit save, and we see this push down far beyond all of this sort of busyness, and it's now inside the sort of body of our actual app. Now all we need to do is make this look more like this. So you think it's really far away, but actually it doesn't take all that much code at all, because everything's a widget. We just need to wrap some things inside widgets. So the first thing is our icon is inside this little round circle thing. And the easiest way to generate these profile icons or avatar icons, or, in this case, just a circle, is to wrap it inside a circle avatar. So we've seen this before, so I won't go into it in too much detail. But if you want to have a quick revision of what circle avatar does, or in fact any of the widgets I talk about, be sure to have a look at the Flutter docs, which as always is constantly being updated, and it has more information than you'll ever want on any of these widgets. So now that I've created my circle avatar, it has an icon inside it, but I also want to change some other properties about this circle avatar, namely maybe the background color. So let's change it to colors.white. And now we've got a nice white icon, so looking pretty similar, right? Now all we have to do is make it a little bit bigger. So let's change the radius of our circle to, let's say, 30 pixels. So that ends up being probably a diameter about 60, so it looks a lot bigger. And now in contrast, our icon looks a little bit too small. So let's change our icon size as well. There's a property called size in icon, and let's change that to 30 to match with the parent circle avatar. Now, remember, whenever you are stuck or can't remember what properties a widget has, the easiest way is to hold down Command on Mac or Control on Windows and then just hover over the widget, and you'll be able to see all the properties that you can change. Now, if you want more information on any of these properties, then simply having your cursor on the widget and then going to our quick documentation, which on Mac, in my case, is F1. But on your system, it might be different. So have a quick look under View, Quick Documentation to see the shortcut. And that will bring up, of course, the docs as well as all the properties and a way of being able to not just see what you can do, but also understand the widget a little bit better. And finally, the final step is, of course, you can hold down Command on Mac or Control on Windows and just click on it to see the source, because Flutter's open source, right? If you ever want to figure out how anything works or how to modify it, that's the final all-encompassing way of going about that. All right, so our icon is looking pretty good, but if you have a keen eye for design, you might have noticed that this blue is a little bit different from this blue. And that's because by default, all of our material apps get a blue color, which is colors.blue as the main theme color. But in our case, we want to switch that out. So let's change the icon color to also colors.lightblue accent to make it match. See, looks much better. Now, the next thing we want to do is add maybe a little bit of space between the icon and the to-doey title. So here I've pretty much got just a 10 pixel gap in between. So because we're working inside a column, it's very easy to add that into the column as a sized box. You don't have to mess with wrapping things deeper and deeper inside padding widgets. So let's add a sized box with a height, because that's the only dimension that we're concerned about inside a column, which is vertical. And now we have a little bit of space, a little bit of breathing room in between our user interface icons. So now let's work on our text widget. So we've got some writing, some string in there, which says to-doey, but let's change the style of our text. So let's change the text style widget to have a color of colors.white. And then what else have we got? We've got quite a large font size, and it's also a bit heavier on the font weight, right? So let's change the font size to, let's make it a really big text, maybe 50. And let's change the font weight as well. And I'm going to change this to a .W700. So this is a 700 weight, which is quite heavy, and it's a little bit more heavy than bold. So you know that we could use bold, normal, light, etc. But you can also have more fine-grained control by using the 100, 200, all the way up to 900. So let's choose 700, which should add a little bit of thickness to our title and make it look very important. So now you can see that everything is kind of shifted in our column though, right? So what's going on? Well, let's take a look inside Flutter Inspector and let's show debug paint to see where everything is. Now you can also, of course, just change the background color of the column or wrap it inside a container or do funky things, but this is the easiest way of seeing what's happening with our layout. And those of you guys coming from web dev, this is pretty much second nature to you going into the Chrome developer tools or the Firefox developer tools. This is what we're expecting to see. So you can see that here is our column, and inside it we've got two items. One is the circle avatar and the other is our to-doey title. So inside, within the column, both of these things are centered by default, but the column only takes up as much width as the children need. So if this to-doey title was gigantic, let's say I change it to, I don't know, 200, then you'll see it forces the column to expand as far as it can within its parent, which is within the scaffold. But in our case, we don't actually want the child to change. We don't want to change the dimensions of this title. Quite happy with that. But instead, what we want is to make everything inside our column to be aligned to the left of the column, which is also known as the start of the column. So let's switch that off and let's go ahead and change a property on our column, which is of course our cross-axis alignment, and I'm going to choose start. So now let's hit save, and you'll see that everything now moves to the left of the column, even though the size of the column has not changed. All right, cool. So now if we compare, we're getting pretty close, right? It looks pretty similar. Now let's go ahead and add the next piece of text. So below this text widget, let's add another text widget. And this one is going to show us how many tasks we have left to do. So I'm going to just add a default sort of hard-coded string of 12 tasks. And then I'm going to change some of the styling of this text widget by changing its color firstly. So I also want this to be white. And I'm going to change the font size to 18. So just a little bit bigger. And that should do perfectly for now. So now we've got the top part of our app laid out. The next thing to look at is this bottom half, where we've got this white area with rounded corners. And it looks really neat because it looks almost like we've got some sort of a little to-do list card that is sitting on top of to-do list name or to-do list title. So how can we create this? Well, we could create maybe a container. So in our column, we've got currently 4 things, and right at the end of that text widget, let's try adding a container. And our container is going to get a color, and it's going to be a white color. So colors.white. But notice that nothing actually shows up when I hot reload. And that's because containers only show up when they have children with a dimension. In this case, this container doesn't have any children at all, but we can force it to show up by giving it some dimensions. So let's give it a height of 300, and we can see our container now right here with a height, and it's also taking up the full width of our column. So how can we turn this white square into this nice little rounded corner card? So one of the properties that a container has is something called a decoration. And so we can set it to a box decoration widget, which gives us a whole bunch of ways of manipulating the appearance of a box. So firstly, we can move the color property over here, because actually, if we try to set a color on both the box decoration property as well as the container color property, notice that if I hit save now, it's actually going to crash. And it tells me that there is an issue because either the color property has to be null or the decoration has to be null. You can't have both a color and a decoration because the color argument, this one, is just a shorthand for decoration, box decoration, color. So this is basically a shorthand for creating a new box decoration with a color. So it's exclusive or. So you can only have one or the other. So now let's hit save and we'll see it turn into a red box, but we want a white box. So now that we've got our box decoration, then we can go ahead and give it a border radius. So a border radius will turn our box from a square box into a rounded corner box. But I don't want rounded corners on all 4 sides because then it'll look like I've got some sort of large icon living on my screen. Instead, I only want to curve the edges on the top. So the way I do this is by creating a new border radius widget, and I'm going to use the only method to only set up the top left and the top right. So this is going to take a radius, so radius dot circular, and I'm going to give it 20 pixel border radius on the top left and the top right. So this is going to be another circular radius of 20. So now let's hit save, and you can see we've got our little curved edges at the top, and we've got a completely square or 90-degree bottom to our little container. It's looking pretty cool, right? But how can we get it to extend all the way down to the bottom? Because at the moment it looks like it's just a bit cut off. Well, one way is by increasing the height, but let's say that I made the height too large, then it's going to go off the screen and I've got my overflow problems. So instead, what we want to do is delete that hard-coded height, and instead we can wrap our container inside an expanded widget, which is going to expand its child, the container, so that it can take up as much space as there exists. But there's still one problem, because at the moment in our card, there's a padding on all these sides, over here, and over here. But in our mock-up, you can see that it goes all the way to all the edges. Now, why is that? Why does it have padding? Well, it's because that container lives inside our column, and our column lives inside a container which has some padding, namely 30 pixels on the left, 30 on the right, and 30 at the bottom. So in order to free our container from this padding, we actually have to take it out of this column. And instead, I'm going to create another column. This column with the to-doey, the task, the icon is going to be nested inside another column. So I'm going to wrap my container inside another brand new column. So now inside this column, I've got a container which contains all of this, but I'm also got my expanded widget which has the white curved card. And now if I go ahead and take off the debug paint, then you can see I've achieved what I've been looking to do, which is that curved edge card like what I've got over here. But there's one problem though, because this column seems to have centered everything by default, because this new column has its cross origin set as center. So in order to move everything back to the left again, in this new column, I also have to set the cross-axis alignment to start. Brilliant! We're getting pretty close to our final desired mockup. All we have to do now is add a floating action button, which is pretty easy. In our scaffold, we've got our background color, our body, and we're now going to add a fab or a floating action button. And it's really easy to just type fab for Android Studio to pick it up for you, because I'm just too lazy to write floating action button. I mean, maybe they should have just called it a floating button or floating circle. But anyways, now inside this floating action button, I'm going to give it a color, a background color property, and it's going to be our favorite color, which is light blue accent. And it's also going to have a child, which is going to be that add sign. So it's going to be another icon. It's called icons.add. Simple. Now we've got our floating action button and pretty much most of our user interface laid out. All we have to do now is to figure out how to create a scrolling list that we can embed inside this container here. And in that list is going to be a whole bunch of little list items with a name for our task and a little checkbox that we can check off. For all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.